Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Here are the stories we're following today.
John, we begin with the latest on the war in Israel. President Biden is warning he will stop additional shipments of offensive weapons to Israel if the country goes ahead with a ground invasion of Rafah in southern Gaza. In an interview with CNN, Biden highlighted the potential loss of civilian life if Israel goes into the densely packed city.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong.
President Biden's comments on CNN come after the U.S. paused delivery of about 3,500 bombs to Israel. Biden's decision, meanwhile, being criticized by both Israel as well as Republican members of Congress. Kentucky Republican Andy Barr joined Bloomberg Balance of Power and said this is unacceptable.
This is an affront to the relationship between our two countries. The fact that this administration is rejecting an act of Congress and turning its back on our key ally in the Middle East is obnoxious.
Republican Congressman Andy Barr of Kentucky. On the other side of the aisle, Georgia Democrat Raphael Warnock also joined Bloomberg Balance of Power, and the senator said we need to do what it takes to end this conflict.
I'm also very concerned about over 30,000 Palestinian lives that have been lost in this conflict, the majority of them being women and children. So I'm hopeful that at the end of the day, we will recognize that the answer to death and destruction is not more death and destruction.
Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock added that Congress will be keeping a close eye on the situation. To hear the full conversation with both Senator Warnock and Congressman Barr, get the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
And staying in Washington, Democrats have helped halt a move by hardline Republicans in Congress to oust the Speaker. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has that story.
Marjorie Taylor Greene did keep her promise to try and bring it to the floor, but was defeated overwhelmingly, 359 to 43. Johnson responds back to the real business at hand.
They made their voices heard on the motion to vacate matter, and now we have very important work to do for the country.
And says he hopes the tenor of the chamber will now change.
Hopefully, this is the end of the personality politics and the frivolous character assassination that has defined the 118th Congress.
It does leave Greene on a political island. Only 11 members from her party stood with her. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, thanks, Ed. And to the markets now. Stocks edge lower before the jobless claims. That's out at 8:30 Wall Street time. It comes with earnings season winding down, and investors awaiting fresh data on a potential timing for lower interest rates. Traders have digested Fed speak this week on the potential path for rates, including yesterday. That's when Boston Fed President Susan Collins spoke at MIT.
I do remain optimistic that this can be accomplished in a reasonable amount of time and with a labor market that remains healthy, but there's a significant amount of uncertainty around that outlook, and the recent data lead me to believe that it's just going to take longer than previously thought.
Boston Fed President Susan Collins says the Fed remains focused on bringing inflation back to its 2% target.
And those comments from Susan Collins, John, come ahead of consumer price data coming next week and following the smallest gain in 6 months for non-farm payrolls last week. Richard Clarida, former vice chair of the Fed and current global economic advisor at PIMCO, says he still expects the Fed to be patient and remain data dependent.
Since the beginning of the year, the inflation numbers have been going in the wrong direction. And also, especially I think what's relevant here is an element of risk management. So I think there is path dependence. The fact that the last 3 years inflation has been well above target, I think it makes it a harder call to cut preemptively.
Richard Clarida of PIMCO says if he were still Fed vice chair, he would not consider cutting rates right now.
And meanwhile, in Europe, markets are poised for a stronger signal on when the Bank of England will cut interest rates, with the Bank of England decision coming today. Bloomberg's Ewan Potts joins us from London with the latest. Ewan, good morning.
Good morning, John and Nathan. Inflation and growth forecasts will be key for the Bank of England today. The old lady of Threadneedle Street almost certain to leave UK rates on hold at 5.25%, a 16-year high. But keep an eye out for changes in the vote balance on the committee. Will the Doves find new recruits for a rate cut this month? And markets will also be keenly watching the governor's press conference for hints on when the BOE might finally start cutting. In London, I'm Ewan Potts, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Ewan, thank you. Heading to Asia now, and a focus on Tesla. Sources tell Bloomberg News the electric vehicle giant is ramping up job cuts in China as sales slow. The layoffs reportedly affect a range of departments, including customer service, engineering, production line, and the logistics team at Tesla's Shanghai plant.
Elsewhere in tech, Bloomberg's reporting on the huge dilemma to Apple. Who's going to succeed CEO Tim Cook? Bloomberg chief Apple correspondent Mark Gurman has examined Cook's tenure and who could follow him to lead the multi-trillion-dollar company. Gurman says there are a number of candidates who could fill that role.
If Tim Cook were to step down in the very near future, look no further than Jeff Williams. He's Apple's chief operating officer. That was the same role that Tim Cook held for many years under Steve Jobs. The other part of it is that he's only 2 years younger than Cook. That's a problem. That leaves us with someone else. That's John Turnus, the senior VP of hardware engineering.
Bloomberg's Mark Gurman says he strongly believes the succession will happen internally and believes John Turnus is emerging as Tim Cook's most likely successor.
And elsewhere in company news, John, shares in chip designer ARM tumbled after a lukewarm forecast. Revenue for fiscal 25 is expected to be just shy of analyst estimates of $4 billion. Kunjan Sabani of Bloomberg Intelligence says it reflects a sector-wide slowdown.
The driver for the slight miss in the fiscal year guidance was coming really from two major areas. One is networking, and the other is the industrial IoT, which most of the semiconductor companies exposed to this are seeing weakness here. So that's not company specific. It's just that end market is going through a cyclical bottom.
That's Bloomberg semiconductor analyst Kunjan Sabani. He says ARM CEO Rene Haas says the company remains very confident in its long-term growth.
And that brings us to 5:08 on Wall Street. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, John. Stormy Daniels will return to the witness stand today in Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial. The defense will try to undermine the credibility of the porn actor's graphic testimony about an alleged sexual encounter and the money she got to keep quiet. Daniels' account is central to the prosecutor's case, accusing Trump of scheming to illegally influence the 2016 presidential campaign by burying unflattering stories. Trump denies they ever had sex. Tennessee has taken the brunt of severe storms that spawned tornadoes over the last 2 days. The storm that rumbled across northeastern Tennessee knocked down power lines and trees and took the lives of 2 people in the state. Spring Hill Mayor Jim Hannigaman says that the team was ready to step in and help neighboring towns in need.
We committed a lot of resources to this event here, and I'm happy to say that it's just a wonderful thing to see all of the mutual aid that came under one command, and everybody that could do everything right, they did it right. We're still working to remove a lot of debris that has occurred.
Another person was killed by tornadoes in North Carolina. 4 flight attendants are facing federal charges for allegedly smuggling drug money while carrying out their jobs. They allegedly used what are known as known crew member or KCM privileges, allowing flight crews to bypass TSA security checks. They are accused of smuggling millions of dollars in drug money over many years to the Dominican Republic. All of the suspects are from New York. Delta Airlines confirms 2 of the flight attendants work for Delta and have been suspended. A House subcommittee heard from the leaders of 3 large public school systems in the U.S., including New York City, wanting to know if they were doing anything about anti-Semitism speech and threats. New York GOP Representative Elise Stefanik is a member of the committee.
Now, I'll tell you, the hearings are important because they do deliver accountability where it has been slow-walked by either elected officials, like in the case of the mayor of D.C., where it took the night before the hearing for them to clear out the pro-Hamas encampment at GW.
Congresswoman Stefanik says there are going to continue to be hearings on this crisis. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, John.
Michael, thank you. it's time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. And for that, good morning, John Stashower.
Good morning, John Tucker. May 8th, 1970, the late Willis Reed shakes off an injury, inspires the Knicks to a playoff win at the Garden, and exactly 54 years later, Jalen Brunson does the same thing. Hurt his foot late first quarter, didn't play at all in the second. Knicks trailed the Pacers by 12 early in the third, but Brunson returned. Knicks rallied. They once again pulled out a victory with big hoops in the final minute.
Lob pass for Hart, left side, drives on Halliburton, right wing. DiVincenzo lines up a three and knocks it down. And the Knicks lead by 9. Brunson one-on-one with Nembhard, crosses over a couple of times, spins in the paint, floats it up, and in. Knicks lead by 8.
On WEPN, Knicks beat Indiana 130-121. Lead the series 2-0. Brunson scored 29 points. Dante DiVincenzo with that big three. He had 28, and so did OG Anunoby. He was having his best game ever until he went down with a hamstring injury third quarter. Also from the NBA, Denver's Nikola Jokic named MVP. Third time the last 4 years. Stanley Cup playoffs after Boston won Game 1 5-1. Florida took Game 2 6-1. Vancouver came from 4-1 down. Beat Edmonton 5-4 in the series opener. Rangers look to stay unbeaten in the postseason tonight. It's Game 3 at Carolina. Fifth straight win for the Yankees at the stadium. Juan Soto got him going. 2-run homer first inning, his 9th of the year. 2 innings later, both Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton with their 8th home runs. Yanks beat the struggling Astros 9-4. Mets rained out in St. Louis. Chris Sale beat his old team, pitched Atlanta to a 5-0 win over the Red Sox. Marcell Ozuna homered twice. Beltway series in D.C. The Nationals tied the Orioles with 2 runs in the 9th and 11th innings. Got 1 in the 12th, but Baltimore won 7-6. Shohei Ohtani's former interpreter, Ife Muzahara, has agreed to plead guilty to felony bank and tax fraud charges. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. John and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager. Israel is facing even more pressure in public and in private as it considers a full-scale attack against Hamas in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. The U.S. has already delayed one weapons shipment to try to stop Israel. Now, President Biden is warning even more deliveries could be put on hold unless Israel does more to protect civilians. And joining us now for more from Dubai is Bloomberg Middle East anchor Jumana Bersetchi. Jumana, good morning. So what is the latest that the president is saying? How is it being received in the Middle East?
Yes, so significant development overnight. I think it's worth emphasizing here that this is the first halt in military shipments we've seen out of the U.S. to Israel since the October 7 attack. And so from that perspective, it is really quite significant and does pose a bit of a questions about the nature of the relationship right now between U.S. and Israel. Yesterday it emerged that they had decided to halt the shipment of about 3,500 bombs to Israel in anticipation of this assault on Rafah. Of course, yesterday, Israel did take over that key border crossing on the border with Egypt. That is a key pathway for the passage of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. And the major concern from the U.S. perspective is the mounting number of civilian casualties, in addition to a growing humanitarian crisis. Around 1.5 million people still live in Rafah. 1.1 million are estimated to be in category 5 of hunger, which in other words means they're very close to acute famine situation. So many people around the world are getting very concerned about the humanitarian crisis that could be looming. But for now, what we see is there has been a limited assault so far from Israel. They have not gone for that full-blown ground offensive that had been talked about the last couple of months. And clearly the U.S. are trying to put some pressure on them now to scale back and to hold back. The background, of course, Nathan, is on the sidelines in Cairo this week. There are some top-level discussions taking place between Qatar, Egypt, and, of course, representatives from the U.S., Israel, and Hamas to find some sort of an agreement on a truce deal.
Yeah, so it speaks to the difficult balance that the U.S. is trying to strike here, trying to show that its support for Israel, as it said, remains ironclad, while trying to keep these hostage negotiations and ceasefire negotiations continuing. What is the balance that the U.S. is trying to strike, and how is it being received in Israel right now?
Exactly. So that is the key question here, because I think it is also worth emphasizing that in that interview that President Biden gave yesterday to CNN, he also said we are not walking away from Israel's security. We are walking away from Israel's ability to wage war in those areas, specifically those areas. Also, again, worth reminding people that this is a pause in these shipments, the specific shipments that I mentioned, those 3,500 bombs. But you may recall that not so long ago, the U.S. did pass a bill that allowed for a package of aid to be delivered to Israel that include further military assistance and economic assistance. That will remain untouched. So that is still going ahead. As far as the Israeli response, we haven't got an official response out of the Netanyahu office, but very outspoken members of the cabinet, more hawkish members, the National Defense Minister Ben Gvir put up a tweet saying Hamas love Biden, very strong statement from his side. Many have expressed displeasure with the U.S. decision and have said that U.S. needs to be focusing on Hamas and restraining Hamas rather than Israel at this point.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm John Tucker. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.